style. So if you're there with me or not, at least you know the trail. We've had now 2 classes, the introduction, which threw a lot at you. The last time, we got more familiar with how important boundaries are, and then we just are going to define those terms tonight. So I wanted to share a few things with you in an introductory way. I crave this kind of content. I was the type of person that studied how to be a good husband before I ever dated. I just love learning, love understanding things as much as possible. Application is not always easy, but I at least want to know. So always growing, always learning. We don't live in a world where good things can be maintained unless there are boundaries. We don't live in a world where anything goes and good still happens, because God has interwoven His nature of principles into everything, and then certainly in this human experience. All healthy relationships have boundaries. We're going to define that tonight and then further clarify the term to see if the boundaries you and I have, the emotional and relational boundaries of what they call property lines for the emotional well-being, we're going to see if they've been responsibly and respectfully drawn. Some people have preferences, and they confuse their preferences for needs, and then they have a wider property line that overextends some others who are justifiably setting their boundary in conflict. So we're going to see how that goes into play. Tonight's class structure, as was emailed, we're going to look at related memes, a summary of what we've done, getting into chapter 1, finishing that up. If you have the book, some of you have gotten some of the cheaply purchased extra copies I have found, or also ordered a few reasonably priced ones online. I'm in pages 29 through 36 tonight. That's where we will be if you're following along in the book. And then if we have good time, after some personal notes I may share, we'll conclude with a video clip for the class coming up on January the 1st. January the 1st, since next week is Christmas Day. But I want to mention that there is an extra book still on display, I think. It's the workbook that goes along with this study, and it's from which we are making those outlines available so you can have those questions and review after our study or even during. The disclaimers: such studies are intended to help you, but learning can be hurtful. Learning this content, if you've never matured in these ways before, it can hurt you, especially when you realize how much time has passed without the blessings experienced from the application thereof. So if you have a lot of pride or regret or resentment that surfaces in those moments, I encourage you to, either from me, the elders, or let's reverse the order, either from the elders, from me, or any professional counselor, seek good counsel from God's Word, from God's people, and God's Spirit. And I always encourage professional counseling, even when you don't think you need it. It's always good to have good counsel. So the Bible is the standard. We're supposed to learn from each other. A book is a conversation in print, so we can learn from someone else's well-studied works how to help our lives. God wants our relationships to honor Him, and certainly in marriage. Let's start with some slides, some related memes. Good relationships don't just happen. Good relationships don't just happen. I often heard it said, and this is from one of the first self-help publications that I ordered, and also programs, from Tony Robbins back in the early 90s, I think it was, Personal Power 2, the driving force, whenever that was. But one of the things he said was, success leaves clues. Success leaves clues. You see a relationship that's not just on the surface good, but genuinely good and strong. There are reasons why. And ultimately, the reasons are based in the principles that are biblically based in the God of Jehovah God. So, success leaves clues. We're going to study them. What comes to your mind when you look at this picture? I'll show this again later if I have time. This one stood out to me. It's an artist's rendering of how two people are helping each other become the best version of themselves. It's a physical metaphor, of course. It's an image talking about the soul that's developed within. But you'll notice some of the things that they're helping each other shed off, which are things that represent materialism, lustful pleasures, you just name it. Everything that's of this world that's not quite right for God and the relationship, each one of them are helping shed things off. It's a beautiful image, means so much. But I think about what we first shared 2 weeks ago. The intent of marriage is holiness. We're supposed to all help each other, but in marriage, you learn so much more about yourself than you do outside of marriage. If living a bachelor, for example, I learned more, and I've said this before, Terry picked up on this. I said, I learned a lot more about myself in the years of marriage than I had ever up to that point prior. So that's just because when we live to ourselves, there are no boundaries in a relationship that you're not in. But when you enter a relationship, there's another person to consider. And there are expectations of how you are treated. So that being the case, keep that in your mind. We'll come back to it if we have time. But I love this one. Love is caring for each other even when you're angry. And I love this portrayal of obviously the husband angry at the wife. But in this case, loves her enough to keep her protected from the rain. And I took note of how elderly they are in this picture. And that just goes to show you that as long as there's the human dynamic of interaction, fellowship, there's always going to be these concerns of how do I word myself, how do I talk, how do I behave, and work through this. So I thought you'd appreciate this. But even when you're angry, I tell you what, this is one situation where I hope you don't experience, portrayed by this meme here, when you try to hug her, but she's still mad at you. That one is hilarious to me. Only as humor, of course. Hopefully it's not in a real-life scenario, but maybe if we practice this book a little bit better, we won't have that scenario. Now we're moving on. Where we've been. We had the tale of two couples, getting you used to what we're doing, and we're going to finish up this section tonight. What is a boundary? And by way of a bonus, part 2 will be January and February. Essentially, you're looking at the whole course right here. We're going to look at the values of loving God, spouse, honesty, faithfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and holiness. That's going to be the bulk of our classes once we get a handle on this thing called boundaries and the 10 laws. That's what we're going to focus on probably January the 1st. But then after that, sadly, we won't focus on portion 3, but some of the content will filter into some lessons that we have queued up to help the whole congregation. I have a bonus read for you here, and I just decided to screenshot it for you. After last week's class, I had thoughts that I wanted to put down quickly or else I knew I would forget. So here we go. This is just not what I handed out to you. This is just on the screen and in my notes. Have you ever shared with your spouse a conversation like this? When you do or say this or that, I feel like this or that. Those conversation starters are for dialogue to express and perhaps establish a property line, a boundary in the relationship. Respect prompts acceptance and or negotiation for willful adaptation of behavior. Because you are in a relationship. There's no way to be connected without being affected. Every healthy relationship, therefore, has boundaries. There is no way to be connected without being affected. And yet, supportive relationships encourage autonomous responsibility for feelings and behaviors. That's the key that you'll notice our authors are emphasizing. In my words, love encourages consideration, but conflict comes when pride desires overreach of another's maturely set property line. Just as employees may quit when key lines are crossed, people often rebel when sensing signs of pride and devaluing control. Go back up to the line I purposely skipped. Every detail on the job may be important, but no one enjoys working with a micromanager if they themselves are disrespectful. Going back to where you picked up, application. Some people think they should have more control over others than they should. Some people don't have as much control over themselves as they can. I'm really proud for lines like that. But enforcing a preference on another, I want to say that again. Enforcing a preference on another is often a sign of deeper issues, i.e. control. It may be past time for the person who has been unduly restricted to have serious conversations to expose the trespassing of boundaries and redefine some property lines. Marriage is about holiness as two people learn themselves and help each other be the best version of themselves. Again, there's that wonderful picture where in marriage, finding someone who cares about godly things will help you just the same. In the overview of where we've been, there's a screenshot here from a book, or from within the book. Let's see. In the first portion of the chapter, we saw that love, freedom, and responsibility are necessary ingredients if a marriage is to grow and thrive. And I will emphasize the word thrive. We looked at examples of boundaries and their importance. We said that you are responsible for your feelings, attitudes, behaviors, choices, thoughts, values, limits, talents, desires, and love, all of which lie within your boundaries. We want them to thrive and grow, but when others try to shrink those standards for you, you are potentially unnecessarily compromised. So this does not excuse others' behaviors, but it does challenge us to get a grip on our beliefs and let others know when they've crossed the line. I went into ministry having no boundaries. That's all I'm going to say right now. I'm glad I know better now. Boundary building. Boundaries in marriage is not about fixing, changing, or punishing your mate. This is not a method to maliciously use to get your way. That's the sin of control. But and he put this in the form of a question. What would you like to fix or change about your spouse? Or what have you been tempted to punish him or her for? Let's just go to God in this. Let's get rid of those unhealthy goals by making them a topic of prayer. Pray about this. Confess these desires and ask God to be at work in your mate, yes, but even as he goes to work to transform you. Oh, I don't need to be controlled. He needs to become blah, 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 blah. That type of response means that you need to pray for yourself. This being stated, let's go back to where we left off last week on the examples of boundaries. Page 29. And I'm not going to read word for word, but some of these will be emphasized. Within that page, if you're following along or just curious, it's under that portion. Fences surround homes. Most homes have doors and locks. In the immaterial world of souls, the relationship boundaries are different. So God has equipped us with special boundaries for interpersonal realm. And here are the boundaries. This is a great sermon outline for anyone who wants to preach it. Words. Words are perhaps the most common boundary that come across. And it goes this way. The most basic boundary is language. Your words help define who you are. They tell other people, what you believe, what you want, what you don't. And here are some examples of words being used as boundaries. No, I don't want to do that. Are you the type, now some people are assertive, they don't care what people think, but in the other extreme, do you hesitate saying that for fear of whatever reason? The response? Now, if someone else doesn't respect your boundary, it's tempting for us to use our excuse first so that they won't ask why and put more pressure when we just don't want to. You've been in those conversations before? But just say, no, sometimes you don't need to explain. Sometimes you shouldn't have to explain. And sometimes words may have to be crafted to explain another person why they shouldn't pry so much. But no, I don't want to do that. Powerful. What about this phrase? No, I don't want to participate in that. Now, the tone in which you say that could prompt further question, discussion to see if there's a problem or if it's just a preference. Yes, I want to do that. I will. I like that. I don't like that. And perhaps as subtle as they are, they very clearly communicate to other people that you have standards, you have a clearly drawn understanding of yourself, and you know your limits by your own preference. And that is very interesting and powerful to be around that type of speech. Hopefully it goes both ways. Your words or lack thereof define you to another person. And in our story, he references Stephanie. He says, the wife in the opening illustration who were on the stairs, of course, and realizing that this marriage is she's sacrificing everything to meet his preference, and losing herself in the relationship. Well, we saw the faults of both, but he goes back and says, Stephanie slowly lost ground. Okay, how did she lose ground? She lost ground on her property lines by not saying what she wanted and what she did and did not like about how Steve was acting. So her silence was like a trampled down fence. This chapter doesn't deal with how to address those issues, but the principles apply certainly throughout the book in our classes. So words are very important. Just a pause for a moment before we go into the next. Words. 90% of our communication audibly is words, and those are very powerfully chosen. Sometimes we just don't say what we ought because of the things that the momentary discomfort that is necessary for the eventual blessing. So any comments along that line? This is good things to process. What about truth? Truth is an important boundary. Here are some things that help define the structure of how we are to relate. And these may sound familiar to you. Do these truths or relational principles sound familiar? Do not lie. Do not commit adultery. Do not covet. Give to others, love one another, be compassionate, and forgive. You best learn in marriage sometimes how to forgive. And there's good reason for that. All of these are commands of Scripture, and I'll continue with the narrative. As we structure our relationships around God's eternal truths, our relationships succeed and thrive. When we cross these boundaries, we lose the security that truth provides. I did not get to add this illustration yet. It's on my phone, but I want to describe an illustration for you briefly. There was a video online that I saw, I liked, I screenshotted the final result. Picture a pottery cup broken into 2 or 3 big pieces. But it was formed together again. The pieces were put back and held together with a Band-Aid. And on the 2 Band-Aids were the words, "I'm sorry, forgive me." Okay, it's in the shape of where it was originally, and then liquid is poured in, nothing else done to the cup, just the Band-Aid of "I'm sorry, forgive me," and then the liquid being poured seeps through the crack and all over the table. When trust is broken. So that image in your mind is good for continuing in this reading. In addition, being honest and truthful about ourselves and what is going on in the relationship provides boundaries. But not being truthful to one another gives a false impression of where we are, as well as who we are. For example, he references the Regina story. When she was adapting to Lee's hurtful behavior, she wasn't being honest with him about what was really going on inside of her. She was acting happily and loving, but in reality, she was miserable inside. So, as Paul says in Ephesians 4:25, each of you must put off falsehood, speaking truthfully then to his neighbor, for we are all members of one body. So if we are not being truthful with each other, our relationships go into hiding. Then instead of one real relationship, we have 2. The outside relationship, which is false, and the inside relationship, which is true. Intimacy would then be lost. True connection, that is. And so is love. Love and truth must exist together. We want the relationship that God wants for us, and so it must be based on truth. But here's another boundary that some people have a hard time crossing. Consequences. When Regina had enough, she finally set the boundary of consequence. She said that she would no longer live with Lee while he drank. The consequence defined the boundary of what she would allow herself to be exposed to. Where her words failed to communicate, her actions did. She kicked him out, basically. And God has given us the law of sowing and reaping. We'll learn more about that in chapter 2. To communicate what is acceptable and what is not. On that note, I'll say that in context, relationships are conditional. I didn't notice I didn't say love is conditional. I'm not going there. I'm saying that relationships are conditional. You have preferences, you have desires, you have standards, and I think it matters to you how your spouse treats you. So that being the case, we just use words. Others sometimes do not get the message. So consequences come into play at times when it's truly necessary. And here are some following consequences that you may remember from the video. Canceling a credit card, leaving for the party alone when the perpetually late partner doesn't come home by the agreed upon departure time. And I'm so thankful that Terry and I are prompt people. One story was telling me by a minister friend of mine years ago. He says he has a point of no return, point of no stay in this case, where he's going to leave the house at this time with or without his wife because of his obligations as a minister. And she got the point one time. Get ready. I'm thankful we've never had to have that trouble. But here's another one. Going ahead and eating dinner when the spouse is late for the 1,000th time. Ending an abrupt conversation. And you've heard things like before, like, let's see, what's the other one? When there's a heated argument and someone says, don't walk away when I'm talking to you. And it's more like, don't walk away. Let me reword this. Don't walk away when there is condescending speech that I don't have to hear. Which side is rude here? What about this one? Refusing to bail someone out of a jam because of perpetual irresponsibility, like overspending or completing work on time. So it's hard to see loved ones, and I'm not a parent, so I can imagine it from that perspective, but it's hard to see loved ones suffer for their mistakes. It's probably harder not to see them suffer in the long run. Emotional distance. Let me summarize this for sake of time. Emotional distance is basically going back to that cup illustration where time to pull back. And it's good to do the routines of certain behaviors that are interacting in a relationship of a daily, responsibility, and like work and dinner and all of these things. But there's time that's required to build back trust if it's gone or if it was broken. So above all else, Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. How your heart is how you experience your very life. So he lists a lot of good points on guarding one's heart. He says that might include saying things like, I love you, but I don't trust you right now. I can't be that close to you until we work this out. Or, when you can be kind, we can be close again. That's a good statement boundary line. When you show you are serious about getting some help, I will feel safe enough to open up to you. Now, it's also good to be mindful when the other person is trying, but that's the only disclaimer right now. What about this line? I can't share deep feelings if you are going to punish me for them. That is a powerful one. And obviously, whether it's male or female, whatever roles are being played in that relationship, it goes either way. So in these instances, the couple has had a commitment to work on the things like the wisdom of guarding some heart with emotional distance until safe and prudent to move closer. And there is a caution he lists here, and I'm going to mention this because some people might need to hear it. The authors say, we caution you that you take this stance only with a pure heart. My personal observations have seen the other, because impure hearts use boundaries to act out feelings such as revenge and anger. Because none of us is pure, therefore, we have to search our own motives to establish boundaries to make sure they serve love and not our impure motives, i.e. our own preferences for dominance and control. Using distance or withdrawal of love, for example, to punish another is a sign that we are setting a boundary not to resolve the conflict, but to get revenge. The question is, do you do what you do to get your own way? Or do you actually apply the principle in Scripture of considering someone else over yourself? We all want our way, but in this case, it's a relationship. It's going to have to be discussed. So, physical distance, we talked about that, is an extension of the time. Distance can provide time to protect, to think, to heal, and to learn new things. In severe cases, protective separation actually prevents danger. And he lists some things about removing oneself from an argument in heated situation. Some people think it's rude to be in an argument and then walk out the room, but that might actually be the best thing. Taking some time away, moving out to get treatment for an addiction, separating from physical abuse or substance abuse, even moving into a shelter when absolutely necessary. But he does say that these boundaries protect the marriage, and that's the ultimate goal. Protect the marriage and make it godly. But as the Proverbs tell us in 27:12, the prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and suffer for it. So you got to be wise to see danger ahead when things get worse and how to make things better before they get worse. And he concludes this portion by saying, although usually a last resort, physical distance is sometimes the best thing that saves. I know we're talking about a lot of things here, very important things. I'd like to just conclude this portion briefly by highlighting some things. I've only got a few things to read left, not as much text from the printed page, but some highlights for sure. Other people. And this whole portion is talking about how important it is to depend on professionals to help guide you until you're strong enough and wise enough to set your own boundaries for yourself. And it's a learning experience because every situation is different with different people. They react differently when they hear your standards and lines. So it's very interesting to learn that dynamic with everyone that you know. But he says down here at the bottom of page 33 in the book, God has always provided us help from His family to those who need it. I appreciate the terminology of these authors. It sounds like they're just right here with us, you know. He says, use a third party to help you resolve a conflict. Use a third party to help you protect and support yourself. Use a group for healing and strengthening. Hello, that's called the church, right? Use others to teach you boundaries. See how they do it. They apparently do it well. Some people in Terry and I's conversations, they observe and they're perplexed by how we talk to one another in those domestic settings. These are the principles we've always applied. I've said, I wish I'd have had this book 20 years ago, and it would have been more of a blessing for me. So on page 34, let's go to the next one here. Even though I think I skipped, we're going to talk about time. Time. It's another boundary. Some people need time to work out a conflict or limit the conflict. The use of time. Everyone's different. Give yourself an allotted time to talk about certain things, like we will discuss our budget for 1 hour on this day next week, for example. Set a certain time to talk about a particular issue, discussing it rather than discussing it in the heat of the moment. That allows you to research your thoughts, your other people's works, filter information, and have, like a meeting. Designate an area of your house or your property or somewhere in town for this particular purpose, and you both know you're going to be talking about this issue at this time and at this location, and then come back to your home perhaps. That might be helpful. Establish seasons for certain goals, like how about this summer, let's work on our communication. And then he lists, how about then this fall, we'll work on our sexual difficulties, or how about in the spring, and then he just lists other things. So that's a good idea to designate time and place for discussion of certain things. He says, just as the physical world has different boundaries, the interpersonal world does as well. Some people have a fence when they should have a door. Sometimes confrontation and truth are important, but sometimes physical distance is not. So wisdom knows the difference. Let's talk about Stephanie briefly. Stephanie's story, again, has a good ending. It incorporates all the principles that we've looked at. She figured out where she ended and where Steve began, and when she did this, she basically took responsibility for what she could do. There was really little of her in the relationship, so when she thought about what she had and what was his in the relationship, she realized that she could not blame him. Now get this, she could not blame him for her loss of herself. She was the one who had, in her mind, complied with his wishes. Good trait to do that. Great, excellent trait, but it just wasn't being balanced with his spiritual leadership and understanding. So she was the one who was afraid of conflict, and she chose to adapt and do what she wanted. And this role is for male or female, whichever one plays those games. She had to take ownership of her passivity At this point in her journey, she made a mature decision. She took responsibility for her own misery and began to work on it within the relationship. And so boundaries are built, established in the context of a relationship. If you don't want the boundaries of a relationship, don't get married. But of course, without those boundaries in the relationship of marriage by God's design, you don't have the blessings of marriage. It's just a different lifestyle, for sure. But as the first step of boundaries is not to have them at all. So if you leave, if you run away from a relationship because of saying, I'm just going to, okay, my boundary was crossed in this case, so I'm leaving. That's to have no boundary at all. So that's a self-defense mechanism against developing the boundaries as they should. I like how he emphasized that. He has a whole page on this. The only place boundaries exist is within a relationship. So between Stephanie and Steve found out that life was not about him, and that if he continued to live this way, he was going to lose something very important, like closeness with Stephanie. As she took responsibility for her life, he was forced to take responsibility for his own life, and marriage improved. And then the book concludes by saying, as they each became more defined, they became two people who loved each other and to be loved. They began to know and enjoy one another more. They began to grow, just like that image of the two sculptures that we saw. This is what we should or we would be like for each other. This is what we would like for you and your spouse to be. So in this book and in this class, we're going to, and I'm already enjoying it, help you become better defined, more free and responsible, and more in a position to love and be loved. This is the high calling of God that He created marriage to be. So it's going to be a challenge from this point forward to mature in the areas of boundaries where you know yourself, you enforce your needs, you express your preferences, enjoy discussion on adaptation, and in the process, help the other, in this case the spouse, be mutually matured in the field of consideration. And it will be an extra challenge on those outside the home because hopefully those within the home agree on these principles and that's your shared mission. And all of that was not typed. That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to share a couple things with you. Here's a prayer. You can screenshot it if you want to know what to say in life or to God and how to express these things. It's basically saying, Lord, help me be in all of these ways how I'm supposed to enjoy these blessings and to enforce these boundaries as needed and to be strong enough and wise enough to do so and keep that relationship growing. I have hesitated on this, but this is a lot of text that and I knew it might come down to this. Oh, I just had the idea. Okay, I thought about reading a huge disclaimer, and this is all a disclaimer. From another person's work, I largely adapted, and I provided it for you here now on the screen as well as on the print for you to read carefully. Since you have it, I'm going to skip it. This would be the time that, if I were to read it, would take away from the video that I would like to conclude the class with. And I'll ask the skilled tech crew to queue up that video. And unless there is any sort of a timeout glitch on the video, since the DVD's been in there for about an hour, I would like to have that played. It's just about 6 minutes. And this is, now that we got a better grounding on boundaries, a preview for what we will have in our next session together on this, January the 1st. Won't be here, of course, like that for next week, but January the 1st, we're picking back up at chapter 2, where we're looking at 10 laws and how they apply in relationship. And this video gives you just a summary of how those first 5 laws are to be applied in any relationship. So if this doesn't work, I will read. If it does, this will conclude our class. All right. Thank you, Phil. Do we have audio on that? It's possible. It could be. That's part of the glitch when it's timed out. What about on the PowerPoint? What do you call it? The PowerPoint fob? Not fob. It's called a slider. Back in the radio days, I used to call it a slider, but I think it's a different switch now. Appreciate y'all's patience as well, just in case. And we'll give them a chance to cue it up because I know that they know that I sure hope it does. And if it doesn't, we'll have a good conclusion. Either way. When I say the PowerPoint, I reference the DVD screen, but in the audio cue of the switchboard, which, it's labeled PowerPoint computer, I think, but that should be no change from ever. The good news is I will have 2 weeks to use a program that Ron sent me so I can extract those videos from the DVD, and this should never be an issue again. So I'm excited about that. Let's see if it's worked. Okay. Well, they look good for the camera, but sadly we can't hear. So we'll just skip on that right now and know that 2 weeks from now you will hear this clip as well as the next one, and that will be a great either intro or conclusion to our class next time. But since we have a few minutes, I will take the opportunity for those online to hear what was on the screen, and it's worth every word. Sometimes the influx of my voice or the inflection will help you understand why I wrote it. And if you're curious about the primary source, I will share with you, but this is how I want you to hear some information. I decided to share this with the class because it might be that you, and thank you for going back to that screen, are the type that in order to be, as you were taught, respectful, you did not express what you feel. So if that's the case over the years, this might help you. And this will conclude our class after it's read. Boundaries guard our emotional landscape. The law of boundaries is about asserting our needs, often also our preferences, but not always, both respectfully and confidently. So, saying no to situations that do not align with set values or well-being. If crafted maturely, such assertive roles or resolve is essential in maintaining our integrity. Because we've all been in situations where we've said yes to something we really don't want to do. Even if it's a good thing, we don't want to do it. So we really have to examine ourselves as to why in those moments. We are able to choose what is and is not best for us. We must, and by the way, doing that would prevent others from swaying you with perceived guilt trips. I have decided never to let that happen again, no matter what people think about me. We must do this consistently. So, while it may first seem counterintuitive, self-defined boundaries give us the freedom to choose. Boundaries give freedom to choose. Interesting. They are like fences that keep us on our best path. Healthy boundaries prevent us from overextending ourselves and protect us from external pressures that threaten to compromise our integrity or well-being. Unhealthy boundaries manifest as a person's difficulty in expressing personal needs or preferences and asserting authentic decisions. That is to say, morally based, not just preference. This can also be seen in a tendency to prioritize others' well-being or preferences to our detriment. That does not then conflict with consider one another. Preference them over yourself. But to our detriment, we've got some concerns here. And, of course, reliance on external validation for self-worth. That need would be met within the body if Christians encourage one another more. So I'll just say it that way. When our boundaries do not serve our integrity, we can feel it as inner conflict. Something's not right here. Some sirens are going off, but we don't know why. We can feel it as emotional pain. We can even feel it as regret. Sometimes we learn where we have been selfish, and that's a good thing. Sometimes we learn, though, where we have been self-sabotaging our own spirit's health by agreeing to things that, are just not healthy for us. Relationships, though, must be healthy, so setting boundaries can be challenging for those who identify as people pleasers. And the opposite extreme is not good either, people who never care about how other people feel. Now, we should be well-intentioned along the way and respectful. Emphasizing self-validation and acceptance is vital to overcoming the urge to seek approval from others. Whoa, what was the secret for that? Emphasizing self-validation. And in this case, I'm not going to say just look within. That's a bunch of, modern philosophical cotton candy. But we know our value comes from God, who we are made in His image. So if we seek validation from others, not just encouragement, but validation, fine line, a risky practice it's a risky practice that often results in disastrous things. So boundaries become a shield for the wounded spirit. The wounded spirit finds refuge, a haven where healing and growth can take root, allowing the spirit to feel stable, respected, and protected. Unresolved violations, as we look upon our past, past mistreatments, all of those can erode our sense of self-worth. So boundaries act as a filter, allowing only from this point forward positive, respectful, and nurturing influences into our property lines. That means if you want someone in your life and you're not an encourager, you need to become one. These limits give us time to develop our capabilities in the areas we truly need to. Respectful assertiveness becomes a cornerstone in maintaining these boundaries. We must learn to assert ourselves respectfully and communicate our boundaries to others. Consider the illustration of a quilt, or it's an analogy. Setting boundaries and acknowledging your quilt's unique design and composition, well, despite others having different patterns and colors to theirs. Everyone's so different. You can't make someone else's quilt like yours. That's just not the way it is. It's unique. But boundaries affirm this as my quilt. This is my quilt. I've acknowledged that. Crafted from my own experiences, my own choices, and values in life. But this metaphor illustrates the importance of our emotional landscape while respecting that of others. And while, and here's the key, not letting their perspectives dictate our own. Yes, we're to learn from each other. The authors in this clip that we'll see next time emphasize influence. That's the only thing you can do, but it has its own power. This mutual respect fosters a culture of understanding, self-respect, and growth. As you can see, we have some fun stuff to look forward to. And I, for one, am eating this up. I love this type of content to evaluate why I am like I am. How can I be like I want to be? And what do I need to change in my thinking behavior so that I can become who I want and need to be? And that's across the board, whether you're married or not. But in the relationship, always have that goal of what's the best version of myself I can be, and have, Lord willing, that spouse that helps along the way. There is a chapter in here that deals with what do you do when that spouse doesn't want all of these things in your life. Well, they deal with that, and Lord willing, maybe we will too. I appreciate how the class worked out. Yeah, I had a lot of fun. And this is the time before any bell ring. I didn't hear a bell. Is it just me? I'm not sure if a bell is rung or not. So any questions or comments from the class that you can share in class time or afterwards for sure? Oh, there's the bell. All right. And that does not mean don't share, but class, I guess, would be concluded on that. Thank you all so much. I enjoyed it. Thank you all, everything.